Hi, welcome to the English edition of Know Your Narrative. I am T, and here is my co-host L, and we are going to talk about the PC culture in general and a little more specifically in Hungary. So the PC or political correctness is a term that basically describes the avoidance of forms of expression or action that are perceived to exclude, marginalize, or insult groups of people who are socially disadvantaged or discriminated against. And it is a very hot topic, especially in Western cultures recently, as part of a kind of a culture war when progressive and left-leaning people try to influence how people in general should talk about certain issues. And this is heavily influencing the media, because a big chunk of Western media is in the hand of left-leaning companies. Left-leaning editors are in a majority compared to conservative and right-wing journalists or media. But we also have to talk about the political correctness in academia, as it is a very important issue, mostly in the West, and also as a lot of startups, mostly in the tech world, are getting more and more easy to build up big companies, and left-leaning people are usually more risk-taking. So we find a lot of left-leaning people in the CEOs' chairs in these tech companies who also have a big influence on our lives.
I think the first thing that needs to be clarified is that this show will be about political correctness, but not necessarily in its dictionary definition form. We are talking about something a lot more far-reaching. We are talking about the consequences of political correctness. So, for example, the way we talk about the media and the way we talk about the PC-ness of the media is somewhat of a clear representation of political correctness. So when you want to learn about news and you go to actual news sites like the BBC or the Independent, or if you're in the US, then you go to CNN or Fox News. And what you see is that you don't find what you're actually looking for. Like in 2017, it's not rare that I actually need to go to Reddit or Twitter to find out the most recent news and not the ones filtered by the media machine. But in general, when we talk about political correctness, we need to look at far-reaching consequences such as various quotas and the way discrimination works in recruitment. Our first stop will be the media, because we think that that's the clearest way to look at it. So if I just propose a theoretical question, when you hear about a terror attack, you automatically suspect it's a Muslim, don't you? That's, on the one hand, not politically correct. On the other hand, if you actually want to make sure that your assumption is correct and you want to have a look at what are the actual facts at this point in time, let's say we are 6 hours after the attack, what's the chance that you will find your answer on the BBC? What's your chance that you will find your answer on the Independent? Close to zero, right?
Yes, usually they will just tell about that there was an incident, and they will keep every detail in dark for a day, 2 days, sometimes even longer.
Yeah, as long as it's possible, because this is another consequence of political correctness, that we automatically assume that the damage caused by announcing who did the actual attack early, so the effect of that, the effect of we letting other people know what we think or who we think the actual terrorist was, causes more damage than the delay that we put in getting all our facts correct, blah blah blah. And usually getting all your facts correct is not how it's supposed to happen. In the British media, for example, right now, it's very common to call Muslims of Pakistani or Indian or similar descent, they call them Asians. And of course, when we talk about the culture war, the right has noticed how ludicrous this is, so they have started making memes about Asian farmers from rice fields with bombs strapped around them. So I think the question that comes to mind here is this assumption actually true that it causes more damage if we actually say that yeah, this guy looked like what you expect he looked like, rather than the damage caused by the fact that basically mainstream media got on the losing end of the culture war.
I think the reason why they don't disclose this information on time is because after 9/11 in the US there was a rise in anti-Muslim bigotry, and I think they try to avoid something like that happening. But when you have a terrorist attack every month in Europe, then I don't think that just saying instead of it was someone of a Pakistani origin, you just say it was someone of an Asian origin. I don't think that actually blurring the information will help anything, because the people will generally extrapolate from their knowledge that there were not really much Vietnamese terror attacks recently, so they won't assume that it could have been some Vietnamese terrorists.
Yeah, exactly. But at the same time, we all understand the motive. I think when you read the definition of political correctness, which let me just read it again: the avoidance of forms of expression or action that are perceived to exclude, marginalize, or insult groups of people who are socially disadvantaged or discriminated against. It's a very nice definition. We all understand the intent behind it. But the question is, does it actually achieve its intent? So when mainstream media, caught up in this PC shitstorm, is being completely, if not completely, but in large parts replaced by independent media on YouTube and on Twitter and Reddit and various other channels. So the question is, was it worth it? Like, if you thought that being PC and hiding the truth for some kind of agenda would work out and will have a positive impact on society, I'm not sure that that's what happened, because you see more divide in American society that you've seen ever before. And if you look at the UK, British society, I feel the same. You've never seen such a big divide as you've seen during the Brexit debates and in the aftermath. So something clearly didn't work there.
Well, I think that because of the alternative channels and just because people are generally not stupid, hiding the facts, it just does what it does. It basically lets people know that you are dishonest and your main goal is not spreading the information, but rather bending the information according to your political agenda.
According to your narrative, right?
If we go to academia, I think it's even getting worse, because like the media just informs the general public, but if the general public has a different source of information like YouTube or Twitter or just alternative news sites like Breitbart or the like, then they can get the other side, the other viewpoint, or the viewpoint of the other side. But in academia, where you go to get a degree, get educated about subjects that you want to work on during your probably the majority of your adult life, this PC culture can cause a lot bigger effect. Don't you think so?
Yeah, and as you can see, there's no such thing as alternative academia, is there? So if you want to be an academic, you can't start your own. You can't just say, yeah, I'm starting my own little academia here. But then if you look back, there was no such thing as alternative media either. So it might be a quote-unquote visionary thing to say now that we should expect alternative, well, quote unquote alternative academia to pop up. We might be justified in saying that there might be some alternative sources of information popping up, which are sort of rigorous, like some sort of academia, alternative NGOs, or I don't know how to imagine them yet, but yeah, the echo chamber in academia, I expect will cause some strong alternative ways of looking at the world scientifically too.
Yes, the left shouldn't have a total hegemony over social sciences. I don't know, it's a little like if the physics department would select their physics professors based on which are their preferred interpretation of quantum mechanics.
Yeah.
Kind of ridiculous when you only have one side represented in the science.
Yes, but at the same time it's slightly different, because in the sciences there might be departments who discriminate based on that, but then there are competing departments at other institutions who look at the world differently, and then you can just choose. But when 80-90% of academics in social sciences in all departments, all across countries and all across the West, are left-leaning, then there's really just nowhere to go, is there? And at the same time, there are other consequences of PC culture, which is like the way academic admissions work. So, yeah, we've seen how in the West it's completely normal to penalize Asians for being Asians and give extra bonus points to Latinos and blacks, which is a form of discrimination. You know, if you look back in Hungary, in 1919, I think, and further on in the 1920s, there were laws against Jews, which we all know, and there was a law in Latin called numerus clausus, which was about basically limiting the number of Jews allowed in the university. And the way they justified it was the exact same thing as they use now in American universities. It wasn't the communication of it was that Christian Hungarians, the quote-unquote real Hungarians, are underrepresented at universities, so they need a boon, they need a boost, so that they can reach the levels where they should be. This is the exact same rhetoric currently used in American universities for discriminating against whites and Asians. And basically, positive discrimination, let's be clear, positive discrimination is just negative discrimination against the other group.
Yes, it's kind of this left-leaning collectivist view of the world that basically pushed the universities in this direction where so the more important thing is that the students should have the similar composition that the whole population, rather than just having the best students possible. And the similar effect works in a lot of tech companies where, as I just said in the introduction, a lot of entrepreneurs are left-leaning and their political agenda aligns well with this political correctness culture, and they also view the world as through this kind of collectivist lens where they cannot imagine that it could be for natural reasons that less women go to tech, or like one ethnic group is just less likely to get into tech. That's not because the tech industry is discriminative against these groups. It just can be coincidental, can have some biological reasons, can have like social reasons. Like if you have higher rates of poor and poorly educated people amongst Black and Latino communities, then it's very nice that you try to help the poor communities, but what's your justification to try to make a race-based argument on this? So
yeah, it's just plain old racism, not reverse racism. It's just plain old racism. And as you said, James Damore's example is the perfect way to illustrate this. It's really an echo chamber, and if you dare to raise another opinion, it's immediately shunned. You are immediately shunned, and you're actually fired. James Damore is not even a right winger. Like he's not even a conservative. Can you imagine what would happen to an actual conservative in that company? He's a moderate progressive. Like he's still a progressive. He's just slightly more moderate than the rabid progressive echo chamber dominant at Google. So it's unbelievable. And then there are other forms of discrimination as well that's disguised as promoting minorities. Like here in Britain, the BBC has job postings where they literally say that this is open for Asians or blacks or some kind of ethnic minorities, basically an inch away from literally just saying anyone but whites. It's just unbelievable because it's also government funded money, so they are just simply discriminating against whites getting into this position. As James Damore said, it was really funny listening to his conversation with Joe Rogan. He said at one point that talking about meritocracy is a microaggression at Google, which made me chuckle.
That's kind of weird in a company where basically the main goal should be to make profit. The meritocracy is a microaggression.
Yeah.
Well, I can understand where it comes from because, well, you can say that generally the lower amount of women in tech is because if it's a meritocracy, then you can just say that women are bad at those skills that are required in the tech industry. And if you say that, oh, the tech industry is a meritocracy and then some woman is there and she is sad because it's only just 20% of the company are women.
Yeah, it's a weird thing because I also see where it's coming from. So basically, I think these people imagine that meritocracy is just an excuse that is used to hide actual existing discrimination. But at the same time, it's not meritocracy that we should be attacking. It's exactly the transgressions, basically. It's when we discriminate and call it meritocracy. That's the problem, not meritocracy itself. Yeah, it fits very well with the PC agenda that we simply purge the word meritocracy from our dictionary, even though it's the thing our whole civilization was built on.
Yes, so I can understand that if you have a skewed system where bigotry and discrimination exists and you call it a meritocracy, that's a bad thing, but just not using the word meritocracy in general is not a solution for that problem.
So what about Hungary?
Yeah, Hungary is an interesting... in the country, this politically correct culture couldn't really get its feet on. So
yeah, it didn't take hold in Hungary, really.
It exists in academia, it exists especially in social sciences, by my experience, but in the media, it's like even the left-leaning media is not that liberal in Hungary, or at least, in my opinion, classically the left-leaning media is more like a socialist kind of workers.
Yeah, it's weird because in Hungary it's kind of the other way around. Like the left wing, which we call the Hungarian Socialist Party, was the party that carried out a lot of privatizations in the 90s and mid 2000s. So it's hard economically to put them anywhere. I would say that on social issues they don't take such a strong opinion as American liberals or British lefties. I would say they are liberal. They're not super progressive, and their stance on those issues are more fluid based on where society is. Don't you think so?
Yeah, so like progressive parties in Hungary cannot really get more than 5% of the votes in the current situation. And this is represented in the media too. So even the liberal media is very soft in these aspects. Like they don't really enforce this kind of politically correct ideologies. Maybe one or two media outlets do that.
Yeah, but you need to see the big change that's been going on since the right-wing government took power in 2010. Because before that, back in the mid-2000s, it was a very strong left-wing majority in the media, and a lot of the sources that are now right-wing were left-wing back then. So we had like a very similar situation, I would say, to what was there a couple years ago in the US, where most of the mainstream media outlets were very left-leaning and owned by people on the left. But then what we saw was that
I don't think they were progressives in that kind of sense, or like to that degree that we see in the West.
that's debatable. Like, they weren't as left-wing as Al Jazeera or Huffington Post, but they were as left-wing as The Independent, for example. So if you look at Origo or Index or or HVG, these kinds of publications were very left-wing at the time.
I think we have to make the distinction between liberals and progressives in that manner, because I agree that a lot of them were liberals, whereas they promoted gay rights and shunned the right wing for its discrimination against gypsies, but I don't think they were progressive in like this radical intersectionalist feminist kind of stuff. Didn't really get hold in the mainstream media. Maybe it was present, but it was far from being
but you need
most relevant aspect.
You need to look at the history of these things, because back in 2005 or 2006, the years that I'm talking about now, that wasn't the case even in the West. So I think at that time Hungarian left-wing media was about in line with Western left-wing media. What happened is just that since our government became right-wing and very right-wing, since then they've been using taxpayer money and oligarchs' money to basically buy up all the media and turned classically left-wing papers into right-wing propaganda. And that didn't happen in the West. So basically what happened in Hungary is that the equivalents of Breitbart are now about 50% of the media we have.
And they are not businesses in a general sense, they are more like government funded newspapers.
Yes, not admittedly, but through secret channels, yes.
And by using government companies' advertisements for their revenue.
Yes, state-owned enterprises with absolute monopolies funnel many millions of dollars to these media outlets that are then just repeating government propaganda.
Yes, and what's funny is that this government propaganda is in a lot of cases or very heavily based on this kind of anti-PC attitude, even though these politically correct attitudes are not that prevalent in Hungarian media and just in general
in public
Hungary.
life. That's a very good point. Like, the main difference that people would see if they would spend time on looking at how this thing evolved in Hungary would be that basically we skipped the era of radical progressive dominance, which was, I would put it between like 2010, 2008, 10-ish to 2015, 16-ish in the West. We simply skipped that and jumped directly to the counter reaction, the counter culture, basically the right-wing response to that without experiencing it, which is very weird.
Yes, what they were doing is attacking countries like Norway for their gender politics. So basically in Hungary, gender studies which is a kind of popular social studies in the West, or at least in the US and Great Britain, I think there is only one university studying and teaching gender studies in Hungary, right? But even before that, the government was very firm on a stance against the gender politics of Sweden and Norway and Denmark.
We need to also mention here that there are excesses in the other direction as well. Like, we complained a lot about political correctness in this episode of Know Your Narrative, but at the same time, there's the opposite of that, which is what is happening in Hungary right now. So government propaganda, actual hate propaganda, managed to sway the general population in a direction where if they see a brown-skinned tourist in a small village in Hungary, the tourist will be shunned, and everyone will just automatically call him or her a migrant without knowing anything about them. So the excesses in the other direction are quite likely even worse. And there was this piece of news which I'm sure you've heard about, where the mayor of a little holiday resort town announced that they will not let any migrants come to his town, and they wouldn't even live there. So Migration Aid just wanted to pay for a holiday for these people, like a few weeks.
Who already got their approval and got their refugee status.
Yeah. So they weren't even asylum seekers or migrants, they were actual refugees who have already had refugee status. And just 8 of them would go to this town for a holiday, funded by Migration Aid, the international NGO. And the mayor just announced that they will protest with all their strength so that these people cannot come to the town.
People have to understand.
This would be unimaginable in the West.
People have to understand that in Hungary, the government has a very huge power compared to a lot of Western countries. So very high taxation, and even a town mayor can have some irrationally high power in their town.
Yes, and if the government doesn't want a business to be successful, then that business quite likely will not be successful.
Right, so in Hungary, basically in a short period of 2 or 3 years, the government managed to totally turn the whole population to this like anti-immigration, and not just anti-immigration, but technically hateful towards immigration. The common discourse in Hungary is not about like how should we help or how could we help the migration crisis. A lot of people just don't even go there in their discussions. Just like don't let anyone in and keep everyone out.
The position which is undefensible in the West, that we should just shoot them on the border, I think it would be a majority view in Hungary.
Or like a very big ratio, even if it's not majority.
Yeah, or if not majority, definitely like...
Everyone who has an opinion differing from that will be called just like a migrant lover.
Or a traitor.
Or a traitor, yes.
That literally happens. And that word has a lot of power in Hungary for some reason, unlike in the West.
Really? Do you think that if someone is called treasonous in the West, it's not that no one takes that as seriously as in Hungary?
Well, I think in the US the word has some power, and they don't really throw it around very easily. In Britain, it has 0 power, and they don't use it at all. Like, I've never heard anyone call anyone a traitor. Like, if it had some power, they would use it. In Hungary, it's actually something that almost everyone calls everyone, and it's supposed to be this very serious threat of basically declaring that you're not part of this nation because you're a traitor.
Yeah, I think people take it seriously. So if you call someone a traitor, then they will take you seriously. So in this aspect, the word has some weight, but because people just throw it around all the time, it lost its original meaning.
If everyone is a traitor, no one is a traitor, right?
Yeah, then...
Okay, I think we briefly summarized what we wanted to say about PC culture in Hungary, and I hope you've seen how it compares to that in the West. And I hope that this little introduction has shown that excesses in both too much PC-ness and too much anti-PC-ness are terrible, and they both result in damage to society. We hope to make some more episodes in English in the future. Let us know if you liked it or not. And I was L.
And I was T. And subscribe to our channel.
Subscribe to the channel. Bye!
Bye!